Today, we're here to talk about how to support your child or student when they want to study or volunteer abroad. And so right now, I'm switching from the introduction slide to the purpose slides, the purpose of the webinar. Essentially, A, what is your role? And B, how can you support? That's essentially the gist of this webinar. And so first, I think what we'll go ahead and do as the panelists is we'll go ahead and present ourselves. And just kind of as a note too, if you have a question, you can ask through the chat box, and then Monica will relay that question to us. There will be a question session at the end. That's when we will likely be taking questions at the end of the webinar. And apart from that, we hope that you'll enjoy the presentation. Everybody is muted throughout the duration, and also annotations are prevented. So starting with introductions, my name is Justin Harford, and I'm a program coordinator with the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, a project of Mobility International USA, sponsored by the U.S. Department of State. And Annie?
Hi, everybody. I'm Annie Tolkien. I'm the director and founder of Accessible College. I provide support for students with physical disabilities and health conditions as they transition to college. And I also work with groups and organizations in schools providing training and consultation on transition.
Thank you, Annie. And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, Gretchen? We've got a couple slides for you as well.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Gretchen Godfrey, and I am Assistant Director at Pacer Center. And I'm going to take this opportunity to just share a little bit about us and why we're involved in this webinar. So Pacer Center has been a partner with Mobility International for many years. We started in Minnesota in the late 70s when the federal special education law was passed to help train parents to understand their rights under the special education system. And we do individual advocacy and referral to both parents and professionals, develop family-friendly resources and materials, and also have a broad range of local, state, and national partnerships, including with MIUSA, like I mentioned. And so if you move to the next slide, one of Pacer's programs is called the National Parent Center on Transition and Employment. And through that project, our goal is to support families as youth transition from secondary education to life after high school, whether that's employment, post-secondary education, or independent living, or some combination of those aspects of life. And so certainly international travel and exchange and study could certainly be a part of that for youth and young adults with disabilities. And so we're excited to partner with MIUSA on this webinar to give some parents more understanding of that process. And I'll just mention our website, pacer.org/transition. We do have a lot of resources for families navigating that transition time and tools to support their youth, you know, in terms of self-advocacy and working together on plans for life after high school. So although they don't address international exchange specifically, there may be tools on the site that many families on this webinar may gain insight from. So we hope you'll check that out, and we look forward to the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Gretchen. Really appreciate it. And now going on to the next slide, we talk about reasons. What are the reasons to do international exchange? Well, there are definitely a lot of them. Professional development, for example, when you go abroad and you resolve challenges both disability and non-disability related, getting books, finding alternatives to reasonable accommodations, troubleshooting when a place isn't accessible, for example, you end up developing some of those amazing problem-solving skills that also end up helping you succeed in a job. Emotional intelligence is another part of that too. You go abroad, you're experiencing a completely different culture, a completely different way of viewing the world, and you're having to sound off your worldview against people with different worldviews. And also, all the while, again, developing your professional skills, dealing with the challenges that come with, that are both disability and non-disability related. You learn to be pragmatic, and you learn to choose your battles, and you develop that emotional intelligence factor. In terms of your global awareness, well, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Learning about another country outside of the United States just generally broadens everybody's perspective. My favorite, of course, is a foreign language. We are in a world now where more and more we are called upon to know a foreign language. And international exchange, spending a semester or a year or even a few weeks in another country are great ways of doing that. So in this next slide, what is your role in all of this stuff? Well, first of all, your role is to set an example. So of course, maybe we all agree that, you know, there's a lot of really amazing, compelling reasons to study or volunteer abroad. And yet students and young people, they encounter all kinds of different influences, peer pressures, concerns of the moment. What about if I miss sports season? What about I've got my girlfriend or boyfriend and I don't want to be without them? Or, you know, all my friends say it's unsafe abroad, or none of us really know of any scholarships and I don't want to end up with a bunch of debt any more than what I got, or, you know, I got to finish to get to work. And you got to kind of set that example and say, you know, challenge that point of view. That there's, you know, there are some things like sports season, you might miss the season, but there's other things that, some things in the moment that seem big that don't seem quite as big later. And so you kind of bringing that experience level in there is valuable. And finally, also just providing guidance and being a sounding board, being supportive, but then also letting them all solve problems for themselves. And so part of the supporting is in the next slide, and we talk about certain questions that you might ask. And it isn't to say that you sit down with them and interview them and tell us the answers to, you know, what country are you going to decide, how much time do you plan to spend abroad, and, you know, do you need credits, and what are your disability concerns? And of course, I would also add funding. I mean, it isn't an interview, but these are questions that you should take into account and that your students should take into account, more importantly. And it can be, for example, the credits one. I have to touch on that. Not every exchange necessarily requires that your student get credit for their major, for their classes. But for example, if they're going to spend a semester abroad or a year as a contrast to a few weeks or a summer, maybe that might be an important factor. So checking in with an advisor or something in that matter in order to make sure that they're going to walk away with credits. And in addition, funding, I don't mention funding on this slide, but funding is definitely a factor. But again, all these things, just kind of making sure that your student is taking into account these questions. Disability, sometimes we see a lot where people with disabilities, when we go abroad, when you've been in high school and maybe you finished your first year in college, a lot of stuff's kind of been taken care of for you. I spoke with a friend with a disability a while back he's a blind guy like me, and all he had to do basically was send the book list to the Disability Service Office at Syracuse. They go take care of buying the books, they order the books, they bring the books in, and they digitalize them, and then he just has to wait, and it all just pops up into a nice little Dropbox there, and he downloads it and reads it. But when you go abroad, you don't really realize how much of that is being done for you. And when you go abroad, you end up having to do that yourself. There's not necessarily going to be a disability office that writes a letter on your behalf to the professor, or that goes and takes care of making sure that you get extra time or that you get digitalized books. So especially asking some of those questions, how are you have this reasonable accommodation at home, how are you going to take care of that while abroad? Because it's definitely, there are many ways of doing things abroad with a disability accommodation wise, but it's just that you got to take some time to think about how that's going to work. And safety, in the next slide, we talk about safety. So of course, everybody, it's probably pretty self-explanatory too. Just a few key really important things is there's the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program from the US Department of State. It's essentially a mailing list. They send you updates of, you should know about protests, you should know about any sort of issues of unrest. If there's anything going on in the host country where your student is at, they will receive an alert. You can also sign up and you will receive an alert. So you can check in with them and say, hey, what's going on? Apart from that, a lot of the safety guidance, carrying copies of your documents, and making sure that your child is paying attention to what the program are advising, because safety can look different depending on the country that you're going to. The number that you call for an emergency, who you turn to if there's a crime, whether you turn to the police or whether you turn to somewhere else. For example, when I was in Mexico, our guidance was the last thing you do is call the police. So taking guidance from the program is extremely valuable when it comes to safety. And so going on to the next slide, and we're talking about everything is going to be very different when your child goes abroad, and they're probably going to experience a bit of culture shock. And so this is important because for you, you're going to be hopefully kind of keeping in touch with them a little bit, and you're probably going to see a little of this. And so your role, again, just making sure that you're providing support and you're kind of knowing what to expect. So when we talk about culture shock, I heard a really great description of it that helps a lot. There's 3 phases: the honeymoon phase, the frustration phase, and the acceptance phase. And so essentially in the honeymoon phase, your student goes to the country, they just arrived, it's the first week. The market is exciting, everything is so colorful, the fruit is really fresh, the vendors are really nice. In the next few weeks, things start to kind of get annoying. The market's kind of musty, the vendors are always being really naggy and asking for tips and things, and so the fruit is rotten. And then finally comes acceptance. And acceptance is kind of when the student has come to accept, okay, this is just kind of the way it is. It's not better, it's not worse. But during that adjustment phase, your student can seem a little bit depressed. And going into the next slide, it's important, you do have a role to support. Keep in touch, that's the first point. But keep in touch every couple weeks, maybe once a month, once every 3 weeks is important. Calling through things like Skype or WhatsApp is a really popular communication tool. FaceTime. In some places, like if your student is studying in Mexico or Canada, you could just phone them up. And keeping in touch and just seeing how they're doing and checking in, listening to them and how they're experiencing the country, and kind of being a soundboard. But not keeping in touch too much, because students do need time to kind of accustom themselves to the country and really experience the culture. And if they're talking to you every single day, then that can be kind of hard. And so also finally, just kind of avoid the temptation right away unless they're really saying things that make you think they're going to harm themselves or something, just try to avoid the temptation to jump out and get involved for them and be that kind of fighter that you've been for them in their high school years. And just kind of just be a sounding board and support them in resolving the issues that come up. And going on to the next slide, now I kind of talked about how you support them, and this is just some really quick background information just to kind of get a better idea of what exchange looks like. So in the types of programs, we have consortia programs, consortiums or third-party providers. If your student studies abroad for a semester or a year, this is probably the kind of program that they're on. And essentially, it's a program that contracts with multiple universities to provide programs. Being a third-party provider and having this design, it has more scale. It can have offices in 60 countries around the world, and it can offer a greater variety of programs. Faculty-led, on the other hand, are programs that are directly sponsored by the university that your student is going to. And those programs probably will, like I said, they'll be led by faculty, they'll be directly sponsored by the university. And then finally, the other possibility, maybe if your student decides to go to grad school overseas, is direct enroll. That's where your student essentially applies directly to, say, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, and they are enrolled as a full-time student. Going on to the next slide, you got to pay for it somehow, and there are a variety of different scholarships. Starting off, there's scholarships from the US government, such as the Gilman Award, the Fulbright, or the Boren. Gilman is for low-income students, undergrads looking to study for a semester. Fulbright supports a variety of scholarly research or study options. And Boren is for your student when they have that time abroad and they've discovered an amazing foreign language that they want to keep on studying, or they just get an idea of a language that they want to start. The Boren program is for intense language study, but you don't actually need to have proficiency in the language that you take on when you go abroad. So it's really an excellent opportunity. Going on to our next slide, we have, after scholarships from the US government, there's scholarships from other governments, such as the Chinese government scholarship for a study in China, the Generation Study Abroad Award, Benjamin Franklin Award from the French government for a semester in France, the Japanese Bridging Scholarship, and for example, one that we hear about a lot, the Kongressbundesstaat program, which offers a combination of college and high school programs for study in Germany. And finally, on the last slide, or the next slide, I should say, scholarships from private entities. So I mentioned third-party providers. One of those, for example, is CIEE. Others are AIFS on the slide, and others that are not on the slide, for example, AFS or ISEP. Those programs often will offer scholarships in addition to offering exchange opportunities. And there's other foundations as well. One example here is the Freeman Foundation, which offers funding for studies in Asia. Now going on, getting kind of to the end of my part here, resources. So again, don't do it alone. There's plenty of resources out there. There's the study abroad advisor at your student's university or at their program that they're applying to. There's the disability service office that should also provide support. There's also the host center in the country where the student wants to study. And of course, there's also Mobility International USA and PACER. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and just hand it off to Annie, who's going to be telling you more about some of the disability accommodation and troubleshooting details. And I really appreciate her being here, and I'm going to pass it on to you, Annie.
Great, thanks, Justin. So Accessible College provides students with disabilities and health conditions and their families supports to ensure a successful transition to higher education. And part of that is also working with students who are interested in studying abroad. So I also work with organizations and groups and schools to provide training and consultation. And just a little bit about me, I have over 10 years of experience of work in the field of disability, and 6 of those years were spent at the Academic Resource Center at Georgetown University, which is Georgetown's Disability Support Office. And it's there at Georgetown I got to work with a number of students with disabilities who were studying abroad, and that's where I really got a better understanding of the challenges that students who want to study abroad might face and how to overcome those challenges. I was also a Peace Corps volunteer in Mongolia and a Fulbright Fellow in Mongolia as well, where I studied teachers' perceptions of disability in the classroom. You can go to the next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit today about things students can do to explore and prepare for international volunteering or study abroad. I'll also bring in how parents can support their students in this endeavor. And if you're a parent, this presentation will provide you with a blueprint of the steps to take and things to consider. So there are a few specific steps for college students with disabilities. The first is to connect with the Disability Support Office at your university. So there, the student can ask about the programs that people with similar disabilities have had success in, or get ideas about how to navigate specific issues. I'd say the Disability Support Office is just a really great place to kind of start that search and start that conversation. So you should always encourage your student to start with those folks. The students can always meet with an advisor in the study abroad office to see what options are available through the school. That's another great place. The folks in the Disability Support Office might actually point you towards a specific person in the study abroad office too, so that is another reason to connect with the Disability Support Office first. And then in terms of kind of best practices, the last piece is to prepare the questions, right? So to know the resources for the students and be patient and also persistent because students might not get the response that they're looking for initially. So they need to be patient and persistent and continue to ask questions and work towards finding solutions. The rest of my presentation is going to focus on kind of the how-to aspects. So go ahead and go to the next slide. Thanks. So today we're going to focus on 3 kind of key details and points. So the first one is the details. The second one is communication, and the third is context. And these are things that both parents and students need to be prepared for. You can go to the next slide. So in terms of details, individuals are going to have different technology needs and different needs based on their condition. So there are a few things to consider. The first thing is assistive technology. If you're going abroad, you have to think about, what am I going to bring with me? If you don't know what assistive technology is, it can be things like medication management apps for your phone, a screen reader, magnifying equipment, essentially any tool that a person uses to perform a task. So first we need to identify, does the person who's going abroad have the appropriate assistive technology? And then the next piece is, will it work for them in their host country? So especially with the cell phone, you need to think about whether the US phone will work in the other country or how you can make sure that your things will work in that other country. Thinking about things like, do I need to ship equipment over? Is there something I can use that's already there? That type of thing. So kind of the logistics around that assistive technology. If your student uses a wheelchair, thinking through kind of how will I get the wheelchair to the other country? What's the topography like? Do I need a different type of wheelchair? The other thing that's really important regarding wheelchairs is thoroughly researching airlines and their policies and reviews around wheelchair handling, transfers, and support. There's so many disability travel blogs now with people who use wheelchairs that are sharing their experiences. I feel like this is something that's a lot simpler to research nowadays. So you can actually look into that and see kind of what are people's reviews on that airline, so that you know how your student's gonna navigate that airline situation. You know, if your student's wheelchair uses a battery, thinking through that piece, is it the right voltage for that country? Do they need to bring a backup battery or another type of chair with them just in case their power chair breaks down? If your student uses a service animal, can the host accommodate the service animal? So they may not actually be required to accommodate the service animal. So that's something you would have to bring up. If it's a college student, you'd bring that up, you know, with the school first to have that conversation about whether or not the service animal would be able to travel with the student, and then working through the pieces that go with that. Also thinking about, you know, are there people with service animals in that host country, either foreigners or host country nationals? And the other piece of that is thinking through, like, how will the student navigate other people's perceptions? I know it's not always perfect in the US when folks use service animals, but for the most part, the general public knows what a working dog is and understands that they're not supposed to touch them. However, in other countries, it's quite unusual to see someone walking a dog on a leash, let alone assisting them down the street. So it's important to be cognizant and aware of those cultural differences, and help your student kind of think through those pieces. And finally, and probably the most helpful piece here, is connections. Do you have connections with people with disabilities in that country? And thinking through, where can I find more information and connect with people with disabilities? Sometimes a simple Google search can yield a lot of information. You might be able to find some disabled people's organizations for that specific country or some other resources online. And you can always contact Mobility International to see if they have contacts or thoughts or support that they can share with you. You can go to the next slide, please. The next piece is communication. So communicating with that host organization or with that host institution is key. So students should assume nothing, right? So you wouldn't want to be, you won't be able to be prepared for everything. So your student won't be able to plan every piece out. So getting a good sense of that location and of the people will help your student be really supported. So one way parents can help is to work with the students to assist them in thinking through their typical day at home. And this might sound like kind of a mundane task, but it's actually something I did with college students a lot. It's kind of a time management component through thinking through each piece of their day, and working through all of those pieces. So students will want to ask questions about housing and transportation and daily living, and working through those things so they can ask their hosts a lot of questions so that they can be prepared, so that they'll know, like, if I'm staying in a dormitory and I'm a wheelchair user, how far is it to get to the cafeteria? You know, what is the terrain like to get there? Is the cafeteria, you know, accessible? Does it have an entryway that I can get into independently, or will I need someone's assistance in getting into it? So those types of things. So if you work with your student to actually plan out like what their typical day is like here and see how transferable that is to the host country, then they can ask the right questions when they're working with that host institution to see where they might have challenges, or you know, maybe they can bring some assistive technology with them to mitigate some of those pieces. But those are important things to talk through before they actually get on the ground. The other really helpful thing is to have a pre-call with that institution. And that could be a video chat, it could be a phone call, but having those conversations ahead of time can be really helpful for both parties, because maybe the institution on the other end actually hasn't had a lot of experience with students with disabilities before. And so they may have just as many questions as your student. And so it's important to have that pre-call and that conversation so you can work through those pieces. You can go to the next slide. It's also important for students to do research about their host country. So parents might want to do research too. We're on the slide, context, perfect. Parents might also want to do that research too. So specifically look into what the culture around disability is in that country. That's something that's really important. It's good to be prepared. And we need to understand that people in different countries may have less exposure or different perceptions of people with disabilities who are going to school or who are employed. And usually when we have less exposure to something, we have a lot of questions, or we've created our own narrative about people. So doing a little research around the cultural perceptions and life for people with disabilities in that specific country can help prepare you. So another tactic is to see if there are other people with similar disabilities that have been to that specific country that you can connect with. And so Mobility International has a lot of information on their website showing students who have studied abroad and what their experience was like. So you can check that out, or you can connect with them to see if they have some information about that specific country and life for people with disabilities there. The other thing to look at, which I mentioned briefly before, is disabled people's organizations, DPOs. Looking to see if there are DPOs in that country that you can connect with. Sometimes the DPOs can help in finding personal care attendants or wheelchair repair or assistive technology or any number of disability related supports. So if you're interested in connecting with other people with disabilities, those DPOs can be a really great source of information for you. So that's something that parents can assist students with as well. And lastly, the trade-offs. So you really need to work with your student and consider what the trade-offs are, you know, the pros and cons. Depending on the country that the student goes to, they might be the first person with the disability to enter that program. And so, you know, there might be some bumps in the road, and they might be sacrificing some of the independence that they had in the US and relying a lot more on other people, but they may get to experience something wonderful and challenging in return. So it's important to have, make sure that your student has good strategies for handling change in place, and also a strong sense of self-advocacy as well as understanding. You can go to the next slide. Here you'll see a picture of one of my former students, Cody, and he's looking very dapper in a gray suit and a red tie. I'll share a little anecdote about him. So he's a young man in his early 20s, and he was a student at the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University, and he's originally from Oklahoma, and he was passionate about learning Portuguese. So he was accepted to a study abroad program in Sao Paulo, Brazil. And Cody has cerebral palsy, which impacts his movement and mobility. He doesn't use any mobility aids, so he doesn't use a wheelchair or a walker or a cane. And when he was accepted to the program, he was really proactive in letting that host university know that he had a physical disability and that he may need some accommodations. He quickly learned that they had never had a student with a physical disability attend their program. And they had lots of questions about, you know, how he would get around, what type of housing his host family needed to have, because in that specific program, you were required to live with a host family. And they wanted to know, you know, whether or not he would actually be able to manage living independently there. Many of you might be thinking, well, you know, if he manages to live independently in the States, why wouldn't they just assume that he could do it there? And part of the answer to that is exposure. Because they had very limited exposure to people with physical disabilities attending universities, they had no idea what to expect from Cody. So even though Cody had been corresponding with them over email, he was getting a little frustrated because he felt like the tone of their emails was a little bit negative and focused a little bit on the challenges that they perceived that he might have in the program. So I worked with him and recommended that we try and do a video chat with them so that they could see each other face to face, you know, hear a little of the Portuguese that he had been studying at Georgetown, kind of break the ice. And we facilitated that conversation. And this gave Cody a chance to ask them the questions that he had. And it also gave the support folks at the University in Sao Paulo the opportunity to engage with him face to face. So they discussed his housing, the location of his classrooms, what a typical day might look like. And in the end, that was a really valuable piece of his process. So needless to say, Cody has, you know, completed that program, graduated from Georgetown, and he's now currently a Fulbright Fellow back in Brazil, where he's, you know, navigating the hilly terrain all on his own. You can go to the next slide. So, you know, in terms of thinking about how parents can best support their students just in general, as a parent myself, I can say that the bullet points here are very challenging for parents. Finding a constructive way to voice your concerns. So I think using some of those tools and working with your student to figure out like what their typical day is, what their needs might be, and helping them in a more constructive way to identify some of these challenges that they might face themselves, and allowing them to reach out to the Disability Support Office themselves, to talk to the study abroad folks, and to present the information back to you as a partner so you can help them flush things out and think through it, rather than taking over the reins and steering yourself as the parent and having those conversations for your student. So that's really important because of, you know, the students really need to get this sense of independence. And college is that time where students are starting to think about, you know, what their life is going to be like once they graduate and have a job and are living independently. So this is a really fantastic opportunity for them to start to do some of that planning. Exploring the resources yourself. So, you know, you kind of know as a parent what your student is thinking about. You can go and look through, you know, do some Googling, do some searching, see what Mobility International has on their website, see, you know, what your Google searches yield about the lives of people with disabilities in those specific countries, and look into that host institution. And probably the most important thing and the most challenging for most parents is letting your student lead the way. So let your student, you know, tell you what they think they'd like to do, and tell you how they plan to navigate those pieces, and work with them to figure out if there's a constructive way to assist them too. And so I think that is all I have to offer today. But if you go to the next slide, let's see. So thank you. I have my website and my email address and Twitter up there. So if folks have more questions or comments, you can always reach out to me. I'd be happy to assist you.
Thanks, Annie. And as we mentioned before, we were going to be joined by an individual of Jay Ruckelschulz, who is an individual with a physical disability. He uses a power chair and a personal attendant. He is asleep right now. It's probably 2 or 3 in the morning in the United Kingdom now, but he's getting his master's degree over there. And we'd be happy to put you in touch if you have any questions about how he kind of made that work with his personal attendant, and of course, getting around in the United Kingdom. At this point, we'd just like to kind of to open it up here. If anybody has any questions. We are now opening up the floor for questions about how to support your student with disabilities going abroad. And just kind of also, while people are kind of putting their questions together or whatever, I would just kind of add really, in addition to what Annie shared, a really great pro tip when you're searching for disabled people's organizations, or I'd also say other entities too, like professors at the host university, or for example, Facebook groups, is using the Google Translate feature. That's actually, when I was looking for organizations and people in South America where I was looking to study, I was trying to figure out what it was like for blind people down there. And I just started translating into Spanish terms, key terms that I wanted to find. And I've actually done searches. I helped a person find a list of personal attendants, like personal attendant listings, because they were trying to hire somebody in I think the Czech Republic. And so I was a country in Eastern Europe. Anyway, and so I did that, and I actually was able to find, first I found the search terms in the language. I put those in, and then Google has this excellent translate to English feature. So I was able to access websites from the country where they were listing attendance. So that's kind of one thing. So does anybody have any questions specifically about what we've been talking about?
Justin, this is Monica. We don't have any questions so far, but Gretchen, do you want to share some of Pacer's resources and the time or any experience you have with any parents or students with disabilities contacting Pacer?
Sure, I can. I'm happy to add a little bit more information. So yeah, any families that are on the call or see this recording are welcome to contact Pacer via the email address on the screen, transition@pacer.org, or our website, pacer.org. And we, we're happy if people have questions on accommodations or connecting to resources. We know that traveling abroad, for whether a student has a disability or not, may seem like a scary proposition to families, maybe especially if they haven't traveled extensively themselves. And, I like to use a phrase that one of my coworkers has said often about the role of families as their youth age. And she talks a lot about letting grow versus letting go. So understanding that there may be a continued role for parents in the process, but letting youth explore their interests in areas such as international exchange is really important. And Justin, I was wondering, especially as maybe people who find this webinar on Pacer's website and aren't as familiar with Mobility International, Annie referred to some things that they might be able to contact you about, but I was wondering if it might be helpful if you gave just a couple minutes on Mobility International and the types of resources on your website, just to have that kind of on record for families looking at this.
Thank you, Gretchen. Yeah, so as you might probably guess, so there's probably, for as much as we've covered here in this webinar, there's still a lot more that we haven't really covered. There's a variety of different kinds of disability experiences out there: blindness, learning disabilities, people who are hard of hearing, deaf. There's a variety of different considerations that we haven't really had the chance to address, but we cover all of that in pretty extensive detail at www.miusa.org, MIUSA, Mobility International USA. We're a nonprofit. We've been around for more than 35 years, and our goal is to advance the rights and leadership of people with disabilities globally through international exchange and international development. In our international exchange wing, I serve on, and Monica serves on, the National Clearinghouse on Disability and Exchange, NCDE, a project of the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, and supported in its implementation by Mobility International USA. NCDE is essentially a clearinghouse of information and resources. We work to increase the participation of people with disabilities in mainstream international exchange by filling information gaps, such as, for example, how do I get a sign language interpreter in Italy? Or what should I know about planning for traveling with a physical disability in Guatemala? Or what should I think about or understand about with personal assistance services? And so we have an address in addition to an extensive online collection of resources, including a search box where you can put in terms such as, for example, sign language interpreters or power wheelchair. We also have a country map where you go to www.miusa.org, just right there at our homepage. You can see a map of all the countries in the world, and you go to that, and then you can appreciate, based on the country, people connected with that country and the stories that those folks share. Well, like I said, I mean, we shared a couple examples of people with disabilities who have done international exchange. There are many more stories on our website, which you can also search using that same search box. And after checking and looking for your information. If you still have questions or if you'd like advice on your specific situation, we get inquiries all the time at our emailing address, clearinghouse@miusa.org. And clearinghouse@miusa.org, you can email us there, and we'll usually get back to you within that week. And also we have a contact form that you can connect with us by. And also we have a mailing list, and so you can keep up with us at our Access to Exchange mail list, and you can also sign up for Mobility International USA's other lists as well to keep up with our international development work. And there we regularly advise out on scholarship opportunities and upcoming webinars, and also new resources that we release. For example, lately, actually, we've been working on a Go Local campaign, and we actually have a podcast series coming out in the next several months where we're going to be explaining what are some of the trends that disabled people should know about the international exchange industry, where it's been going over the last several years. There are some really compelling reasons and developments that show why it is that there's really no better time than the present to volunteer or study abroad. And also we have an upcoming publication of our A World Awaits You Away journal, which is a regular magazine publication that we put out. And Monica, would you remind me of our Away journal? What we're going to be? Why don't you comment about what we're going to be covering in that?
Yep. Hi, Justin. Yeah, thanks. We have one coming up based on Champions for Inclusion. So we've connected with a lot of study abroad offices and disability offices that are really strong advocates for students with disabilities to participate in all types of international exchange programs, such as studying abroad. So we wanted to highlight those stories so more professionals in the field can learn about more of those inclusive practices to include students with disabilities. There is some recent data that came out that shows a lot more students with disabilities are participating in study abroad programs. And so we want this information to go out to a lot of study abroad offices in the nation to say, you know, maybe some programs might be hesitant in their language to students, but we want them to be optimistic and positive in their language to include students with disabilities and know that there's resources like our office and different professionals in the field that are working very hard on different things to make sure that their programs are inclusive. So yeah, that will be coming out at the end of this month, and we'll be sharing it through our e-news as well as our website, and we'll have print materials if anybody wants them too. Along with other resources Justin was mentioning, we have various publications directed to international students with disabilities, directed at American students with disabilities, youth with disabilities. This one is focused on professionals. So we have all of those resources online. We have podcasts, different stories, videos. So I think as parents and your children, it'll be good to kind of go through that resource library that we have and, you know, look through it together or, you know, share this information. It's not just for parents, but it's for you to share information about Accessible College, about Mobility International, about PACER with your children to say, hey, you know, this is some information I learned about. Here's the website. If you want to look on it on your own, that would be a really great step for them as well as they start to learn and hear more stories about other students participating in these programs.
Monica, this is Gretchen. I'll just quickly add, I should have mentioned that we do have on our website some resources directed towards youth directly themselves as well, and we're continuing to build in that area. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, great.
Thank you, everybody. And also just kind of keeping up with that, we'd like to invite you to also keep following us next year. We're going to be working on more resources for community colleges, and also we're doing a deaf initiative, so keep up with that as well. Yeah.
Well, I don't see any questions coming through, Justin.
Okay, great. Well, if that is all, I mean, if anybody has any questions that occur to you after we get off the line, go ahead and email clearinghouse@miusa.org. It's really been a pleasure having everybody here. I just want to thank our panelists for their patience and energy and working with us and ultimately coming out here and doing these amazing presentations that they did. Thanks for Accessible College and PACER, your collaboration, helping us get the word out. And also thanks to our staff here at Mobility International, Monica and Ashley in the office, helping us to clarify some of the technological challenges in the learning process that we've been experiencing. So I really appreciate everybody. And with that, we're going to go ahead and also thank you very much to ACS. There will be a copy of the captions for the presentation afterwards. We do have the presentation being captioned. And with that, everybody, we wish you a great rest of your week and a happy weekend. And we'll be in touch soon. So bye-bye.
Bye, thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye.